Welcome to B Flow Sessions, the podcast where we help you find the flow in life and on the river. I'm Brad Burden. Join me as I talk to paddlers, athletes, and adventurers who are all seeking the flow. B Flow Session is brought to you by the brands that keep us in the flow: Dagger Kayaks, Sawyer Paddles, Stohlquist PFDs, and Level 6 Gear. Thanks to them for keeping us in the flow. Check them out and take your next adventure to the next level. Welcome to the next episode of B Flow Sessions. I'm your host, Brad Burden, and like always, we're joined by some of the best kayakers in the world and in the industry. And this episode is no different. I am joined by an absolute legend in paddling and somebody who has a major impact on kayakers all over the world through his designs. Ladies and gentlemen, I am joined by the great Scott Shipley. Scott, thanks for being on B Flow Sessions.
Brad, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're certainly excited to have a discussion with you. So, just a little bit about Scott Shipley before we get started. Probably the most decorated American slalom kayaker of all time. 11-time World Cup champion, 3-time Olympian, 92, 96, and 2000, correct? Did I get those dates right?
Yep, that's correct. Barcelona, Atlanta, and Sydney.
Okay. And then, near and dear to my heart, I'm a freestyle guy. 1993 silver medalist in the freestyle world championships on the Ocoee River, right?
That's right. A short but sweet career in freestyle.
Well, and to me, those are, some of the things, being such a great paddler in both aspects is what, of course, your slalom accolades speak for themselves, but somebody who really could do it all, and even a national champion in C2 slalom as well, right?
Yeah, I did do a little kind of back and forth C1, C2, and kayak.
Yeah, pretty much if there is something that floats, it's a pretty good bet that Scott could paddle it faster or better than most people out there. So Scott, B-Flow Sessions, it's all about finding your flow and living in the flow, both on the river and in life. Tell us, how did you find your flow in kayaking?
It came up the other day, and for me, it was so automatic, and I went out, I was literally in second grade, was on a baseball team, and my brother kept pestering my dad to take us kayaking, and so we went one day out in a Grumman canoe, and the next weekend there was a race he said he would take us to, but I couldn't race because I was on a baseball team, and I literally quit baseball so that I could focus exclusively on kayaking from second grade on. And so there was no, lukewarm approach to paddling. The second I tried it, I loved it. And we lived by the sea. And so I could paddle every day if I wanted to. And I did.
And you grew up in the Washington Pacific Northwest area, right?
I did, which back then, now everybody's at the gorge and doing all these things on the white and the little white, or white salmon, I guess, the little white salmon. But back then, it was kind of the netherworld of kayaking, and nobody was really out there. We had our own kind of core group, and I spent most of my youth training with the Canadian team, which would come to the West Coast because for them it was the warmest place to train in the winter.
Sure.
And so that was kind of where I kind of grew up paddling, and now it's kind of the destination that people travel to.
Yeah, it's a big whitewater, far like extreme whitewater destination. But a lot of like flatwater sprinters and rowers from that area as well, right?
There are, in fact, I went to college, and a kid went by me in a U.S. canoe kayak team jacket, and I ran after him, and I was like, "Hey, man, do you have my jacket?" And he's like, "You must be Scott. I heard you were here." And so, and he was a flatwater team guy. And one of the other guys we paddled with when I was there was Greg Barton, who won the 2 gold medals in 90 minutes apart at the Seoul Olympics. And, a very successful career in flatwater. And so we rubbed elbows with those guys, but we were definitely in different sandboxes most of the time.
My dad he got his start in flatwater sprinting in the 80s, and so competed in training with guys like Chris Spilius and Barton and things. So those are names that I grew up with as a kid. But I was like you, I didn't want any part of trying to race across a lake as fast as possible. I wanted to get into the rapids. And
I'll tell you what, when you go out with them, it's humbling. They are faster.
Oh,
that's for sure.
Way faster. Yeah,
they're bigger and faster. Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like the evolution of like a creeker thinks that they've got a good forward stroke until they're around like an instructor who thinks they have a good forward stroke until they're around a slalom guy, and then a slalom guy thinks he has a good forward stroke until he's with a flat water sprinter, right?
Yeah, very true. When I went out with
And then
Greg,
wild
he
water in
was
there too.
exactly, he was a gold medalist, and I was so excited to paddle with him. And I did one workout, and I thought that was humiliating. I'm not going to do that again. And so he just moved the boat very quickly. But it was a good group to train with, though, and we. I followed at several of those Olympics. I would run into those guys, once every 4 years. Once I moved to Atlanta, especially, you'd run into those guys at the Olympics, and it'd be kind of old home day. You get to see these guys you hadn't seen in 4 years and catch up. So it was good.
Yeah, for me in freestyle, I would cross train a lot in the wintertime, doing a lot of slalom work there on the Nantahala or in the Tuckasegee and there in Bryson City, when it got too cold to flip over in a hole. So and
Yeah,
used to
exactly. Yeah.
do a lot of weight training with guys like Sam Davis, who was a big racer at kind of same generation as me, but in the slalom side. So
Yeah, there's a limit to how many ice cream headaches you can have in a year, I think.
1,000%, yeah. Uh, So who were your flow guides? Who were your first mentors? You mentioned your dad getting you started, but like once you progressed in kayaking and started taking it seriously, who were people who were your mentors?
you know, Initially all those guys that were out west with us. And so there was some really kind of top level guys who had gone back east and then retired. So the Day
Mm,
brothers, Mike and John Day, super influential in my childhood. And in fact, kind of superheroes, I'd go to the workouts, and if they were there, and they weren't often there because they were retired, it was such a big deal to me to, be able to paddle with these guys who were just a level above. And
mm.
then as we started going more and more to Canada, we were racing with guys who were actually national team members and racing in world championships and things at that time. And so Dave Ford and Patrice Gagnon, who were, either medalists or near medalists already when I was 16, 17 years old. So it really gave me people to chase too, which was exactly what you need when you're that age to progress. And so I was very lucky to have them.
So that was kind of the late '80s.
That was the late 80s. And then the really neat thing was the Worlds were at the Savage in 1989. And we had a guy, Rich Weiss, who was fifth in the Worlds. And really, a lot of people thought he medaled. There was some controversy there. And then Brian Brown, who had finished 11th. And so we had two guys who were basically top 10 in the world, plus Patrice and Dave, who were certainly either top 10 or top 20, now all training at that same site right when I went to college and lived an hour away. And so we had this training group that was sort of made up of the key ingredients that you need to create greatness. And then we just started pushing each other. And in the end of those four paddlers, three of us went on to medal at the World Championships and in World Cups. And
Mm.
going from never having somebody from North America do that before to, at one World Championships, Dave Ford and I were 1-2. And so it really changed the result sheets from what they had traditionally been with this European dominated sport.
Right. And I was, as you were saying that, and then thinking about the '93 Worlds, and just of course, like I dabbled like little bitty in slalom, but mostly freestyle. I want to ask a delicate question, and like not meant to offend. I mean, you certainly and your other counterparts had your um, dominance and things at the World Championships and World Cups, but looking at the two disciplines, and it's probably just because the Europeans were doing it for so long, but where on the freestyle end, it's almost like the Americans for so long from the '90s all the way through dominate freestyle, but in slalom, it's a lot of the European dominance with just a few Americans, sprinkled in there on the podium. I hope I asked that delicately enough, but by getting to the heart of the question.
And really kind of two things going on there. The Europeans were very dominant in the kayak. In the canoe, Americans were just 1, 2, 3. John Ludwig,
True.
Davy Hearn. In the ladies, Kathy
Yeah.
Hearn, Linda Harrison, a lot of medalists, Donna Klodek that came from those groups. So we really had
Good
elite
point.
athletes all around us. And in this men's kayak class, it was just hard to crack that nut. Richard Fox from Britain was great. The French were great. The Czechs were great.
Yeah.
Lubos Hilger, the Germans, and just very strong competition that was out there, and nobody really rose up and was able to crack that nut the way it needed to be. And we became that group that were able to
Yeah.
get in and do that. And that was a big deal. In freestyle, because that sport was evolving so much, if you look at the boats that competed in the the freestyle world championships in '91, it was like a creek boat basically that they were
Right.
using to win these things with. And then by the '93 worlds, you had the very slicey boat. The Hurricane kind of came out, and then
Hmm.
the Super Sport came out at the same time. And then right before the worlds, we got our transitions, and all of a sudden, we had a tool that was really made to do this. And in some ways, I felt like it favored EJ and I because we had
Yeah.
been paddling that kind of boat all along.
Right.
Not in the sense that it was freestyle, but it had the low bow and the slicey ends and the pivots and the cartwheels and stuff that we could do from our freestyle side. And so that really helped us. And also just a lot of luck right on the day that really helped us. So having
Uh,
said that, we sat there and, I went up on the weekends. I was in school, and right behind me is Mark Lyle, who just gotten started in the sport and just a machine every single
yeah.
workout. Just you could see him just sort of go from like, that guy's kind of goofy to like, and I don't know if we'd have stuck around and trained full time if Mark Lyle wouldn't have cut through us like butter. By '94, he was certainly one of the dominant people in the world. And
Right.
that went on for a couple of years after that. He was, you could see the level of the sport. Also, Ken Whiting and some of those guys just take off.
Yeah, I think the boat designs at the Type 2 were great for guys like Mark Lau because they were just so strong and they could throw that boat around, right? Now it
Yes.
almost
Yeah.
tends to lean itself towards the leaner guys who get a lot of pop with the aero moves and things.
Yeah. Quickness. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a different sport than it was, but that's part of that evolution, right? And then all of a sudden there
sure.
were flat spinning boats, the next worlds. And so you see a bunch of stuff like that happening.
Somebody I interviewed was talking about the '93 Worlds, and they said that one of your advantages was because you didn't focus on freestyle, you couldn't always necessarily stay in the feature the whole time. But if you got blown out, you paddled back in faster than everybody else.
100%. Yeah. When they were just keeping track of total points, the more time you spent in the hole. Yeah. And the other one is I couldn't roll on the left. And so I can hand roll on the left, but I've never done paddle rolls on the left. And so if I one of the things I invented was the split wheel because it was all one paddle blade, right? So I was better on the right and I could keep it that way. And if I flipped, I would flip towards my roll side and stay in that hell hole is not super retentive, right? So it did that. And a lot of times if I flipped over, by the time I got organized to roll on the left, I'd fallen out and I'd have to sprint back up. So it kind of dominated how I trained and strategy and things.
Very cool. Um, Talk to us about your Olympic experience. I mean, we've been lucky here at B-Flow Sessions. We've had some other Olympians on, but you're the only three-time Olympian, and so each one talk to us about just what that experience is like. I love watching the Olympics. I mean, my dad tried out for Olympic teams. I love watching them. I love watching the opening ceremonies, and it's even better when you've got a friend, or now, we've got daughters of friends who are competing in the Olympics. What is that moment like walking out in the opening ceremonies, representing your country?
There's a bunch of key moments in being an Olympian. The first one happens like way before you think it does. And it's when you decide, I mean, there's a lot of people like, I'd like to go to the Olympics someday, but at some point you have to decide, I'm going to go to the Olympics and then start doing the things that get you to the Olympics. And that's a lot more than like, hey, I want to be the best guy on my high school football team and when you make that decision, people laugh at you, right? Like people don't want you to do that. They don't want you to go full time, and they think it's funny that you think you're that great. Because when you start, you're like little 17-year-old Scott Shipley, and you're saying, I'm going to go to the '92 Olympics, and people are like, oh, that's nice, but stay in school, or that's nice, but don't make that your day job, and so that's your first Olympic moment, and it's really hard. And those 3 or 4 years when you're living on $6,000 or $7,000 and you're not winning races, and you're
Mhm.
camping out at I used to work daycare at the Nantahala and camp down there by the train tracks.
Yeah.
And so Andrew Holcomb was my daycare kid. I was one of the kids I had to watch. And at the end of the day, those are the Olympic moments, right, where you're really fighting your way up. And even up until, because I was so young, until I really, made that team in '92, I think I was the outside chance. There were people who had been fifth at the World Championships in '89. There were people who had been top 10, that had medaled in these races. And so I was chasing Eric Jackson and Brian Brown and Rich Weiss and, Marty McCormick and a bunch of really top paddlers. And so for me, that was the terrifying moment, making that Olympic team and then not sleeping for like 24 hours because there's so much energy. I mean, that was the big moment for me. It was just crazy to actually make it and know that you were going to go, and also sad because a lot of people didn't and just retired. So you had friends just going because they all held on for this Olympic thing, and then it went away. So that was a very powerful Olympic moment when you actually, and for me it was on the water, right? When you actually get on the water at the Olympics and you're warming up for your event, and people are going down that course, and it's become a canyon, right? It's been a whitewater course the whole year, and all of a sudden there's bleachers along that whole thing that are 50, 60 feet high, and there's just a roar, and you can hear it go all the way around the corner and back as that person does their run, and you can tell when they mess up because it stops, right? And so it's just incredibly loud, and we're doing this. I'm paddling up to warm up, and then I turn around to paddle down to head towards the start line. I was ranked above Eric, and I see him paddling by, and I'm thinking, man, I wonder how he did. I didn't even pay attention to the crowd. And he gives me big eyes, and then he spins around and starts sprinting down, and he's realized he's late for his start at the Olympics. And he ends up sprinting around the corner. The start guy just waves him by. He doesn't even go in the starting gate, and he just goes across the start line and does his Olympic run. So the most Eric Jackson thing of all time. And then I think he did better than me. So yeah, so typical EJ thing. So yeah. Fantastic though. You can't explain what it's like to actually get there and represent America, and then take that first paddle stroke at your Olympics.
Did your thought process, or like kind of your view of the Olympics change with the three? I imagine, and I don't want to put words in your, but I could imagine being in '92, being like, "Oh my gosh, I'm just so glad to be here." To then '96, the Koi may or may not have been like your true home river, but your home. It's on, you're on your same country, being one of the favorites, and also in 2000, kind of like, does your expectations change with the different Olympics as you went through your career?
The for each of I have the distinction for each of those three Olympics of winning the last major event before each Olympic Games. And so I won the World Cup at Richard Fox's home course in Great Britain. At that point in time, there were 4 or 5 British athletes who had either won a World Championship or World Cup or a World Championship or a World Cup or an overall World Cup title. And so to go to that home course and win that, and then go right to the Barcelona Olympics as my next event, I kind of came in, and you realize this when you get there. Even the people that you think have zero chance of winning, they have been living this dream, and it's like your best friend, right? They've been living this dream for 15, 10, 20 years, just like you. When they get there, the dream in their head is they're going to win that games, and everybody's crushed at the end. And no matter what they tell you, I knew, I was just here for fun. Then nobody's there for fun. You're there to win that race. And it's tough to lose. And so for me, it was devastating to lose because I had been living with this idea in my mind that I was a gold medalist much longer than I realized for all 3 of those games. And then it didn't end up happening for me. And so that was a tough loss to take. At the same time, all the things that gave me joy in that whole process still happened, right? And so that last millisecond of like, oh, it'd be nice to have a medal around my neck. That experience of being that top level athlete and really pushing yourself to that very limit and going fast and being able to do anything you want on whitewater, that golden moment was there. And if I could go back and say, enjoy this moment, there would be a lot of moments there before and after the Olympics that I would have wished I'd enjoyed more, because they were, it's never like that again. You'll never go that fast again. It'll never be that easy again. And, you'll never have a perfect run again after you retire. And so that part I loved.
Joe Jacoby mentioned at the '92 Olympics, you didn't really feel like you were part of the American Olympic team. You just felt like you're part of the whitewater community. Like you guys were kind of separate and kind of did your own things away from the other Olympic athletes. And then EJ talks about, like, especially in freestyle at the World Championships, it was almost like competitions amongst the boat manufacturers, like the different teams, like Team Wave Sport, no matter what country you're from, versus Team Dagger, no matter what country you're from. How did that evolve through the different Olympics? When did you get other Olympics feel more? Did you get to experience a camaraderie with the other athletes?
The example I always give, and I married an athlete from the German team, is that at the Sydney Olympics, which was 2000, so that was the new millennium. We were all down in Australia, which is where the first sunrise of the whole globe happens. I think
Mm-hmm.
we were time zone like 2 or 3. We went to a party. We managed to get into a pretty exclusive party because one of the guys we hung out with, dad, was a bartender, and here we are under the Sydney Bridge, at the New Year, fireworks going off. There were 34 countries at that party, and we were all super close friends because we had all been the ones who stayed after the World Cup ended and trained all fall in Penrith, Australia, right near Sydney, to get ready for that Olympic Games. That was our like training crew that was there, and we were all very close and very bonded. And the sad thing is, when you retire, you don't see those people very much, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
they live in Austria and Japan and Australia and all over the globe, and so that group kind of broke apart for a lot of people after that Olympics. But at the same time, we really are part of this global community. And when you get to the Olympics, you realize like the swimmers aren't. They race college stuff, and then they race the
Yeah.
world championships, and somebody books them a bus and a hotel, and they show up and race, and then they race the Olympics. And for us, I knew on a first name basis every single person that competed in that Olympics, and would have hung out with them or paddled with them or what have you. And so it really is this global community, and I love it. Um, I disagree with Joe. I really felt like I was part of that American team, though. We were very proud to be part of that team. And then when Joe and Scott won their Olympic gold, and Donna won a silver at that
Yeah.
Olympics, Donna won a bronze at that Olympics. We were super proud to be part of that team that had come home with the medals. Devastated that John Lugbill, who was like my childhood hero off of Wheaties box, right, that he didn't win a medal there. And so I really felt part of a team there for sure.
So I want to make sure I'm clear. Joe definitely felt amongst the whitewater guys, he didn't feel a connection and camaraderie to the other Olympians, like the basketball players or the swimmers or the track and field athletes. He's like not like we were hanging out with all these guys because we were kind of separated, riding our own bus to our venue and things. If that makes sense, he
Totally.
did.
Yeah. It really felt like we just had backstage passes to celebrities, right? Like you would see the Dream Team, or you would see Jennifer Capriati, or, Matt Biondi or Janet Evans. And you would just be like, oh my God, I met Janet Evans, and we were at a party together, and she touched my hair. And so you'd be all excited about that. But Janet never sent me a Christmas card or anything, right? We were a much closer group amongst the international athletes than we were to the rest of the team.
Yeah, so I want to make sure didn't want to get Joe confused there. He definitely
No,
didn't
no,
express that amongst the
absolutely.
whitewater crew. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so perfect flow. Tell me about some times when everything just went perfect on the river. I mean, obviously about times when you gold medal at World Cup events that would classify, but any other times?
The race that stands out for me was actually the Olympic test event
Okay.
on the Ocoee River. So we'd all done the fall World Cup final, had won that, and then I've been racing really well in that Ocoee, and then at that test event, had a really good first run, and was leading by a big margin. And I thought, well, I'm just going to win this race, home course, and I had a good run, and it's over. And then, starting last, I'm at the start line, and I can tell that Thomas Becker's beaten my first run, so I'm not winning anymore. I'm all alone. I'm up on the top, and I'm surfing. There's a wave up there you can surf, and I love surfing it. So I'm back and forth on this wave in my slalom boat, cutting edges, and then turning around and going down to that starting gate. And it's almost the last thing I remember. I just remember starting and having the best kayak run of my life. And I don't have
Mm.
video of it anymore. I don't know where it went. I know it was covered on TV, but having the best kayak run of my life, and ended up beating Becker by half a second. He beat me by like a half a second, and I beat him back by half a second, and winning that race. And just that moment, top to bottom, the boat going so fast, and in some places, just this massively turbulent water. You got to work your way across it and do something, and then you just get the right surge, sit back, and you're in and out of an upstream, and you're like, I can't believe that went so well. Nobody will ever be able to do that again. And of course, Thomas must have done it to be within a half second of me, and so just the perfect run on the perfect day, and then that being my outlook going into the Olympic Games was just this amazing feeling of flow in that race in that day.
I gotta be like a fanboy and cheese out for just a moment. So, during the 90s, like that's when I'm a kid and I'm wanting to get into kayaking and things. And, you were like a celebrity in the kayaking world. And I remember like having like, like tearing out like Paddler magazine with you on the cover of it. And it was like a poster hanging on my wall the way some kids have a poster of Michael Jordan. And then going to the 96 Olympics to get to watch you and cheer you on. I'm like a 15-year-old kid at the Olympics cheering you on. It was really cool.
That's awesome. You were there. I didn't realize. That's cool.
Oh yeah, I was one of those people in the stands watching and cheering on. Had like a USA. Remember those like Oakley jackets?
Yes, totally. Yeah,
Yeah, I had like an Oakley USA jacket.
I
Yep,
love it.
cheering on all the Americans. Yeah. What about flood? Tell me about some times when something went wrong on the river, or just wasn't your day.
You know, we now build these low head dam training facilities that we. And so I was talking to somebody about how to swim out of those today, and at the same time trying to describe how that's actually quite different than a beatdown. And so what we were talking about was on. I was in DC training for a couple of weeks in '93, and it rained a bunch. And EJ's like, "Let's go run Great Falls." And so is illegal back then. So we got up at like 5:30 in the morning, and we go run the I guess the Maryland side, the not the side with the spout, but the other side. And we get to this big U drop at the bottom, and he goes, "Look, I like to surf the wave at the crest." And I was like, "I can do that." And then he says, "Make sure you're right when you get off, otherwise you're in trouble." And to me, right is like right of middle, right? So I surf the wave, and then I peel off to the right, and I hit an eddy in the middle of the current, just kind of behind the wave, and just bow goes down, and I go deep into this huge hole. And it was so deep and so dark, you get below where there's daylight. And so it's just pitch black. And I don't know how deep I was, but it was super violent. And I just thought, there's nothing happening here. I got to get out of this boat. And I hadn't swum in years then. And I swam out of the boat. And even then, you couldn't push against the water. It was just foam. And I was just in that recirculation zone. And I don't know which way was up or down. At one point, I hit the bottom of the Potomac, and I thought, I'll crawl out. And then I was like, I don't know which way's out. Like it's just pitch black. And I just remember relaxing and thinking like, I'll just hopefully flow along the bottom here. And thankfully I did. And I came up on the boil line. But EJ, he's not a worrier. And at some point he got worried, and he got out of his boat and ran down the bank and saw that I wasn't in my boat, saw the boat floating downstream, went back up, got in his boat, put his spray deck on, ran the drop. And that moment that I came up was my first breath in that whole adventure. And he was right next to me and so I was swimming downstream as hard as I could swim, and I grabbed his stern, and that was by far the worst day. And it gets in your head, right? You just, so yes. EJ's like, "Do you want to go run fish ladder?" I was like, "I think I'm done for today. I'll take a break. I might go to bed again and start over, And so terrible day. And of course we've all had, that's a self-centered terrible day, but we've all had days where that happened to somebody else with different results. And that also is just, something you have to kind of process and work your way through as well, because it's a part of this sport as well.
It is, and it's all relative, right? Like, that was a day where, not to say that Great Falls was at the pinnacle of your skill level, but you were pushed, and it was challenging, and something bad happened. And that's no different than a beginner going down the Nantahala for the first time and flipping and swimming. And, you could kind of be like, oh, they're just learning or whatever, but it's all relative to whatever your skill level is at the time.
Yeah, and comfort level. It really is. And I think we all remember those really bad swims early on where you're like, I swam entrance drop on the Yacht, and it was terrible, and
yeah.
Now we would jump in and float down it in a tube, right? But at the time it was panic, and there was water over your head, and you couldn't see, you didn't understand what was happening. And so yeah, it's definitely comes in levels, but it's a part of the sport, I guess.
It is, yeah. What about low flow? Times when you've been away from kayaking, either by choice, injury, job, family, things like that.
My life's kind of followed this progression. I finished the 92 Olympics, and a lot of people took some time off to process. And I literally went home early and started training. I was like, I'm going to win the 96 Olympics. And the same thing when 96 happened. I'm going to win 2000. This isn't going to happen again. And when I didn't win 2000, in that moment, after a lifetime of only caring about kayaking from second grade on, and I can't exaggerate how true that is. Like I skipped the prom, had a date for the prom, found out the race schedule, skipped the prom, right? Like everything, all I ever really thought about or talked about was kayaking. And in that moment that I lost the 92 or the 2000 Olympics, I just thought, this is over. I'm not doing this again. This is the moment that ends. And I did do some races after that, but I never had that passion again. And I knew I was done. And I went back to college and finished grad school. And that was my low flow, but I always loved to paddle. And so even as I did grad school, I'd go up to the Ocoee every weekend and run it. And I would, go down to Charleston and surf in the waves when I got longer breaks. I would, run the Thompson or run the Ottawa or I always just came back to kayaking. My wife was a kayaker from Germany, so I kayaked with her. When we moved to Colorado, we bought a house with a whitewater park in the backyard, which I installed. And so we had a baby monitor that reached out to the river. But as I get later in life now, my kids are not paddlers. We still go on raft trips, but they're not passionate about paddling. My wife still is. I still kind of coach and affiliate with this club that paddles there. But I'm realizing now as I'm like working too much and in hotel rooms like this, that I should be paddling more. And so I've really started to turn my focus into getting back out on the water more than I have and started to live that life again. I just ran Bailey Canyon for Bailey Fest and just reliving like how much joy that brings in my life and how that creates a whole weekend adventure that I enjoy planning for and being a part of and then remembering. And so hoping to spend more days on the river rather than less as I get older.
Well,
I'm van shopping, I'll tell you that much.
Well, I'm sorry. What was that last part?
I said I'm van shopping. Tell you that much. Gonna live by a van down by the river again. And
there you go. Yeah. So that kind of brings us to current, and I want you to talk about your company and kind of I jokingly, but it's kind of true. You're kind of like the Jack Nicklaus of kayaking. Like he was the best golfer who then went around and designed golf courses for everybody to then play on. I mean, people, you're definitely amongst the best kayakers and to ever live. And now you go around designing whitewater parks for people to play on. So I think the parallels are kind of there.
It's been a super interesting progression. And I did engineering school. I went to school in Atlanta after the 96 games and finished up after the 2000 games and then was planning on going to work in ship design, but ended up getting sidetracked and doing whitewater park design, which is a very similar thing, and have kind of stuck with it. And I did it for a few years for another company and then just thought, like, I think there's a better way to do this. And so I started S2O Design and Engineering, which kind of came from a brand that I was using when I was doing gear design with Dagger and Warner and all these different companies, and started to think about how to do it better. And that's what the Charlotte Whitewater Park really was, hey, we've been doing these whitewater parks for Olympics, focused on those 200 or so Olympians, that 1%. What if we did a pumped whitewater park, but we thought about instructional kayaking and we thought about swiftwater rescue training and we thought about rafters and, even the slalom kayakers, what makes their training and their racing better and easier to broadcast and easier to market? What creates an outdoor lifestyle in its entirety so that instead of having to go run the Grand Canyon, we can bring a night around the campfire with some music and some whitewater right into downtown Charlotte, right? And that's what S2O became about, was how do people touch and feel these parks and how do they use them? Not just in a theoretical sense, like what's the best class 5 river we can create, but in a real sense of like what's going to get a bunch of people that have never paddled before wet, and what's going to create somebody like Miha Smolin, who's a 12-year-old kid when he started paddling at Charlotte, up onto an international podium, or Evie Leitfarth now, up onto an international podium. What's going to create something that we can put on TV or create a X Games around and things like that. And so we really thought through all of that in the design, and that became the kind of nexus for all the projects that we did. What creates a better whitewater park and what creates a lifestyle and a culture instead of, for example, water slides. People aren't passionate about water slides, right? They go do it once a year, maybe twice, but they're not. It's not a lifestyle thing, and we create these lifestyle centers for people, and it changes communities, changes lives, and brings more people into that sport. And so that's the company that I created. And now, as you know, I'm here with a swiftwater rescue training facility. It's created all these offshoots of other lifestyles where people are like, hey, I want this in my whitewater park. And so we've started to focus on how to design for specific clients as well.
So, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, these urban whitewater parks or altered rivers and things is fairly new. And I really believe that these parks are going to be what keeps kayaking alive, and then not just keeps it alive, but has it just take off and grow. Because one of the big complaints I used to always hear whenever I was a competitive athlete in kayaking is, there's no money because there's no visibility, because the places that we're going to compete a lot of times are in the middle of nowhere, or the things that we're doing like nobody can relate to. But now taking whitewater, and instead of trying to bring people to it, we're taking the whitewater to the people. And I think it's going to really help the sport explode.
We don't have the marionette master that's controlling our sport that's saying, here's how we're like NFL or something like that. Here's how we're going to grow the sport or put it in more places. But if you look at the 90s, one of the things that really drove freestyle was the business around freestyle. All those boat manufacturers were competing, and they needed to win events like the 93 Worlds, like the 95 Worlds. It became, IR used to have a freestyle series, right? It became event based, and even the trade shows were very interpersonal. We were an outdoor lifestyle that moved around and interacted with the client. And that sort of went away as all these things folded together into corporate whitewater. And we've lost that sort of driving economic force that was creating events and making things happen. What I see happening, and I've been forecasting this for a while, is like we need more than 3 great whitewater parks in America. And when we do, we're going to start to see those people competing for the events that they need to fill up their whitewater parks and to market their whitewater parks. And so we're getting there, right? We have Montgomery, we have Oklahoma City, Charlotte, and those 3 are kind of the major. And there's a bunch that are this next echelon down in terms of size and capacity and things like that. But those 3 are competing for Olympic trials and national championships and freestyle events and X Games style events, which are kind of a little passe now, I guess. But at the end of the day, once we create this 4th, because that's how many events are out there, then we start to create a competition between them, and they're going to start saying, "Hey, we'll have prize money," or "Hey, we'll give you this training time," or "Hey, we need our own team." And that's where I really start to see the sport starting to grow in America as a place-based thing, and if they do it right, a club-based thing again, which would be amazing.
And not only compete against each other, but then also maybe work collaboratively to have like point series, and where athletes, whether it's slalom, motocross, or freestyle, kind of have destinations to travel to, and you kind of collaborate. So there's a circuit that kind of makes sense, like slalom had for years and years and years. And I don't know, probably still does. And freestyle certainly did from the 90s through the mid 2000s, and kind of died off. But these whitewater parks could help revitalize that as well.
It's 100% true. And part of that is, the national governing body has gotten funded less because the Olympic Committee has less funding since the kind of mid 2000s, 2004, 2005. And so there's nobody really, like I said, able to control and drive that sport into these places. But I'm starting to see those places do it themselves. Really, Oklahoma City reached out and grabbed that 2028 Olympics and brought it to Oklahoma City from LA, right? And so you see these venues trying to pull in these big events and world championships and World Cups. And that is sort of driving the boat for bringing paddle sports back to America and being a preeminent thing, where international athletes are actually traveling to our country.
I know you can't go into a lot of details, but where in the world, U.S. and globally, are some of the places where you see urban whitewater parks that may be in development that people could be looking out for?
Middle East has a bunch coming online soon. So we're seeing growth over there. In Europe, it continues to be a big sport. Czech, France, Britain, Germany, it's a sport there, and you see venues coming online here and there, but not as much as you would expect. They have a strong commitment to the centers that they're in already. Um, there are a couple of big ones coming in America. Another kind of U.S. National Whitewater Center size park coming into the Midwest.
Mm.
And then one that I'm super excited about is a gravity fed whitewater park for Danville, Virginia. And
Mm.
so one of the problems that a lot of these pump parks have is it doesn't pay to turn the pumps on over the winter. And because of the way they work, they're either on or off for a whole month, right? Because
Mm.
there's a demand charge associated with each month. And so they tend to turn off in, you know, end of October and then turn on again in March. And our team tends to go away to train in Australia or someplace else. What would be amazing is if we had a training center with great whitewater, consistent throughout the year. And by having a whitewater park that's driven by gravity, which
Mm.
Danville will have, we're going to have a training center that can be used year round. Also, the
Wow.
lowest cost place to train because they don't have that electrical charge. And so, and conveniently not far from Charlotte or DC, places like that are centers for the sport right now.
Sure. That's really cool, and it's just amazing to me, and I'm super excited for what the future holds with all those parks. Um, what advice? This next segment is flow advice. Think about a beginner paddler of whatever age. What advice would you give them? But also then think about the older paddler who maybe has gotten out of the sport, who wants to get back in, maybe through family and jobs and things. They had to step away. Now they've got a little bit more time, they got a little bit more disposable income, and they want to get back into the sport.
You know, they're both centered around the same idea, which is that the technology for our sport has gotten so much better. You know, the BRAP or the power slide or the ripper or whatever it is that you're paddling is such a better plastic boat than what we paddled, you know, when it was a dancer or a super sport or something like that back in the day. Um, and way easier for an old person to paddle or a new person to paddle than a kingpin or something really small, right? The freestyle boats that were out there in that era. And so my advice for the beginner is learn to paddle. It's not like rock climbing where you're like, okay, I did a V7, now I'm going to do a V8, and tomorrow a V9. And I'm going to go on up, and if I hit the mat harder, who cares? Kayaking can be, you want to be a good kayaker when you're on good whitewater, and the boats will let you do it even if you're not right now, and you'll
Hmm.
get away with it, but not necessarily, right? You want to be you want to be the one who catches the eddy every single time, and you want to be the one who can read that line and do that line really well. And so that's my advice to the beginner: is take your time and enjoy the Akoi, enjoy the Shituga, enjoy the Nantahala, work your way up and earn your spurs before you go up to the next level. The same is true for old paddlers coming back. My first bit of advice is throw away your old boat. Go buy a new boat. They're so much more fun. Slalom boats are shorter now. It's like, you know, being 10 years younger. They're way better. And some of these plastic boats, which they race in now at the Olympics, right, with the motocross, they're
Yeah.
incredibly high performance plastic boats. Just enjoy it. I keep having friends write like, "Hey, can I get a hold of one of these old boats that I loved?" And I'm like, "Don't talk to me about that. Throw that boat away and get, you know, that looks good in the garage. Find yourself something new and paddle it because these boats are really fun and they're super fantastic." And so that's my advice to both ends. The other thing is, it's a fun sport. Enjoy the time on the water. Enjoy the surfing. Enjoy the playing. You don't have to hug yourself off at a 60-foot waterfall until you're Dane Jackson, right? And so,
That's
so build your way up.
That's so funny you mentioned that. I fit that second category of, I've stepped away from the sport for 20 years and just would like literally once or twice a year, even sold all my gear. And this summer I decided I'm going to buy stuff and I just want to be able to, for a hobby, do it a couple times a year. And I'm like messaging people like Andrew Holcomb and Sam Davis, old friends of mine who are still paddling. And I'm like, I just want to get a GT. And they're like, why? And I'm like, because it's
You
$300.
don't.
And
Yeah.
they're like, for
Yeah.
$500 more, you can get a rewind, and you're going to be so much more happy, or whatever the case may be. The Ripper from
Yeah.
Verana, and you mentioned the Liquid Logi boats. They're all so great. And I was just like, no, they'll do the same thing. I'm just going down. I'm just going to be on the Akoi. And I got an Axiom. And then like a month later, I was like, nope, I need a rewind. And so I've been just absolutely loving the rewind. It feels like
Yeah.
a creek slalom boat. It's great, or a planing hull RPM, which was my first like real boat. My first boat was a dancer, but like when I really started paddling my first boat with the
Yeah, they've
Olympian.
really
So
evolved. They're fantastic. They've really evolved.
yeah, and I love just getting on a wave and surfing. It's like I don't really need to throw cartwheels anymore, and I certainly am not going to be going off waterfalls anymore. But just running a river with friends and surfing a wave is pretty awesome.
That's the truth. Yeah, and run the Grand. That's my other piece of advice for the old guys. I always put it off. I'm like, hey, I've got too much to do. And when I finally ran the Grand Canyon, I now all I want to do is go back. That was the most amazing trip, and hopefully back there again soon.
It's pretty high on my bucket list, and we last one of the last episodes we talked to Wayner, and he said he's never been. It was his river that got away from you. And I said, you're not too old, so let's just try to make it happen, Wayner.
Yeah, totally. I ran it with my 12-year-old kid and my 75-year-old father when I did it, and they were both in kayaks.
That's awesome.
So pretty magical moment, but also meaning that all of us can still do it.
Absolutely. Well, Shipley, are you ready to run the rapids with me?
All right, let's do the rapid fire.
Okay, so this is a Mount Rushmore segment. I'm going to throw out some topics around kayaking, and I'm going to put you on the spot, and you got to give me your top 3 to 5 from each category.
Okay.
All right, kayak designs of all time.
I like the Brap is the number one. I like the I'm blanking on it, but the okay, I'm not very good at rapid fire, I guess. Fabien Lefebvre had a boat, and I forget what it was called, but it came out after I retired. That was the best slalom kayak and best evolution of a slalom kayak.
Okay.
And so I would say that was the second. And then for the third, I'm going to say the boat that I'm in now, which or the boats that are out there now, like the Omikaze for big guys, or the some of the top level slalom boats that they're using right now, which are fantastic.
Okay. Your favorite rivers of all time?
Thompson River, Gauley, Ottawa.
Okay. Countries to paddle in?
New Zealand, and Canada. New Zealand by far the best.
Okay. A river that you've not done that you want to do?
Zambezi.
Okay. And paddlers of all time? Could be any discipline.
Jessica Fox. And then I'd have to say Richard Fox and Lugbill. I think those guys are so far ahead of the pack. Fabien Lefebvre too.
Yeah. All right, final flow.
You got to throw EJ in there too. There's actually a lot of guys out there.
Yeah, it's hard, and of course we're all so jaded or by our experiences, right? I mean, you named 4 slalom paddlers right off the bat, and a lot of people may go extreme or freestyle oriented. Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah,
hard
in your
to pick.
mind, EJ comes up, but then you're like, that guy in the Speedo over there, I don't know. And then, yeah, he for sure is.
I don't. He's not done much slalom, but his son definitely is up there as far as, especially on the freestyle and extreme side. Yeah, for sure.
It's hard to believe that the stuff he does is possible. Yeah, it's amazing what Dane can do.
It's crazy. Yeah, and I don't know that if you've gotten to spend much time with him or talk to him, but just so humble, so full of gratitude. It's really amazing, and his attitude towards the sport is really great.
Yeah. Great ambassador for the sport.
1,000%. Yes. All right. Final flow. The river gods have come down and they said, Scott, you've got one more day on the river. There's so many things we do in life that we do for the last time, and we didn't know when we did it for the last time that we would never do that thing again. So the river gods have said, this is your last time in a kayak, but you get to pick the boat you're in, the river you're on, and the crew you're with.
I'll tell you what, I go back to my time in Chilliwack, and I would want to be on the Thompson River, which is near Chilliwack, big water like the Ottawa, and I would want to be with that crew of guys, with one exception. I would want to be with that whole group of guys that I was racing with in 1990 and 91, and I'd want my wife to be there as well. But that's the crew I'd want to paddle with again.
And what boat are you
And
in?
I wish we were all as good as we were when we did it last. Oh, in the hottest, lightest slalom boat, of course, which is all I paddle.
Okay. All right. Well, Scott, thank you so much for carving out some time to be on B-Flow Sessions. Thanks for everything you continue to do for the sport, driving it forward with your designs and everything that you've meant to so many people. So really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, and hopefully we'll see you again soon on some new whitewater.
Yeah, that sounds great. Let's get out and paddle sometime.
Love it. All right. Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of B-Flow Sessions. Please take a moment and rate the show, give it a follow, and leave a comment. Also, if you could share it with your fans, your friends, your family, and everybody else you know in the paddling world, that would help the show grow and help more paddlers find and be in the flow.